(7:11). I will come out of recess. We had an earlier executive session, and now we're back in open session. I will ask everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everyone. I will open up tonight to the board and see if anybody has any opening public comment. Hearing none, my one announcement today will be that I wanted to congratulate the graduating class of 2014. This past Saturday, I had the pleasure of going to the graduation, as I typically try to do, and again, it's always a moving moment to see, the students pass from the high school after their whole years here and then go off to college. And it was a good ceremony, some good speeches by the students and some of the faculty and superintendent. So I just want to congratulate them and wish them the best of luck in their endeavors wherever they may lead them. Any public comment from the public? Hearing none. Do you want to take this ambulance fee first?
The first one's only going to take a
What?
minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Request to approve a common victualer's license for KJ Waterfront doing business as Embers Pizzeria at 84 Lakefront Avenue.
Okay, so the application for the license is complete. We are still awaiting the food service permit. We wouldn't release this until we have this food service permit from the Board of Health. But other than that, the application is complete and up for your consideration this evening.
So that's before us. If anybody has any questions or would like to make a motion for the common vic license.
I would make a motion to approve the common victualler license for Embers Pizzeria.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Okay, well, that's making its way down. A request to increase ambulance fees, and I see that we have our fire chief, and I'm assuming, only you're coming up. Okay.
My ambulance director, Karen Weller, here for moral support and technical assistance if needed.
Thank you.
Good evening. Again, I'm here before you to look at increasing our ambulance rates. For a couple of reasons. We have not seen done an increase on them in several years. I believe the last one discussed was in 2009, and I don't believe that was done then. The primary reason, again, for this is one of the things that was brought up during the budget season was the departments were asked to look at potential revenues outside of the tax base to offset our operating expenses and help out our departments. One thing that we can do in our department is the ambulance fees. Obviously, that's a big part of our job nowadays. It says fire department on the truck, but 60% of our runs are EMS related. Again, I'd like to be able to say here and say that we don't have to charge a thing for the ambulance, but we do have to offset our costs. And that's my primary reason for this, is to A, be able to offset some of our expenses that we see, take care of a couple of issues in the budget where we're having a little bit of problems, and possibly, if the town sees fit, provide some extra additional money for funding to cover some additional time of coverage in the station or staffing. Again, basically our increased costs, if you look at the spreadsheet that I gave you, and the electronic copy that went out originally that I gave to Kerry, there were some errors on that. There was one math error. I'm not a math major. Caught that. That was a small one. A couple of the numbers that we'd gotten a while ago from the building company were, the more I looked at them, they were quite a bit off. I've gotten updated numbers, which I like the bottom line a lot better than what I had. It shows we still do make somewhat of a small profit with the ambulance. But some of my concerns that have been going along is the increased costs, just going down through this quickly, are, you can see if you run across the line item, some of our costs for ALS service, which is basically since we don't run a paramedic level service, when we use someone else's paramedic, we have to pay them. Those services need to make money too. Some of their rates have gone up. Also, we see a lot more sicker people that we need the ALS services for. So that has increased somewhat. Cost of maintenance and fuel has gone up. Everybody has seen that. The maintenance costs have gone up because the vehicles are older. I'm hoping that's going to go down with the new ambulance coming online in a few weeks. The fuel expenses, what we see is we see longer runs. Now, what used to be once or twice a year, we would go to a further hospital like a UMass with a critical patient. We're seeing that now 2 and 3 times a month, that we're seeing either critical patients that have to go to Worcester by ground, because we found that we used to call a helicopter a lot. Most of the time, we can get them there just as fast by ground than sitting on scene waiting for a helicopter somewhere. And it's actually much cheaper for the patient if you've ever seen what it costs to take a helicopter ride. We also see a lot more people in town that are requesting transports to Emerson Hospital, Clinton Hospital, Haywood Hospital. They're being followed for specific things with some of those hospitals, and generally we want to take them to where they can get the best care. And that's something that originally the state law used to say we had to take them to the nearest facility. That has changed. They recognize the changing medicine, and that they want to get, now we can take them to where they are seen or where they're being followed for a specific condition. But it means, again, more wear and tear, more fuel, a little bit more personnel costs because it's a longer turnaround time for the calls. Some of the other numbers in there, a lot of the other numbers Ms. Spidell provided me, the police fire IOD has gone up. I don't know how much of that's been out of my department, how much of the police, but it's a shared pool, so that's gone up a little bit. What it doesn't reflect on here is a couple things that I brought up in my budget presentations every year. Our salary, our fire and EMS expense generally runs, or salary expense generally runs around $15,000 to $20,000 over every year. In the budget presentations I've shown, generally my overtime costs are usually about $10,000 more than what is budgeted. Again, that's all callback, because my career guys, I need them to come back after hours, and a little bit on my duty officer coverage in the weekend. And adding those together makes about $17,500, which is right in the neighborhood of where I usually run over. Part of this cost would, additional revenue I would like to see try to cover that. Also, EMS supplies, we've been level funded at $6,000 a year. For that for quite some time. We're seeing our expenses running up around $9,000, creeping up towards $10,000 for equipment, oxygen, consumable supplies in the ambulance, or ambulances. There's several reasons for that. Primarily is costs are going up. Everything keeps creeping up in price like everything else you see day to day. We used to be able to get a lot more supplies from the hospitals. Again, they've cut back on what they will give us. We used to be able to get things like cervical collars, oxygen equipment, other things like that. They've had their expenses too. They're trying to cut back. They've cut that back. We are looking at a potential group purchasing that might reduce our cost on some of our supplies. It's not in place yet. It remains to be seen what we will gain out of that, or how much savings we can gain out of that. That's still being worked on through Central Mass Emergency Planning. Again, the increase that I've requested, the sheet I gave you on the regional survey that was done, it's dated 2011. It was actually more like 2012. The highlighted section for Lunenburg is the proposed increase. You can see that pretty much follows with communities of similar size and operation that are around us. And what we're asking for is not way out of line with what most other towns are charging.
Do you have what the numbers were that we're changing these
Yes,
from?
I do. It is generally, I can read them all off if you'd like. It's generally a 30% increase overall. 30%. The original, like, all right, as an example on there, the original BLS rate was $530. And that we've gone up to we're proposing to go up to 731.
Can you go through all of them?
Certainly. You have the numbers in front of you for the existing ones. The BLS rate, which would be just basically a normal ambulance ride, is was 530, or is currently 530 now. The ALS 1 rate would be was 635, or is currently 635. The ALS 2 rate is currently 910. Mileage is $20 a mile. Charge for oxygen is $75 flat rate. Advanced airways are $180. IV treatment, if one of the EMTs starts an IV, is $160. Use of the defibrillator is $140. A cervical collar is $80. And taking an additional EMT, by law, we have to have 2 EMTs. Occasionally, there are situations where you need the third EMT in the truck, and the law does allow us to charge $121 for that additional EMT. Those are what we are charging right now. And again, you see, you have the numbers before you for the proposed increase. Some of those are a little under 30%. Some of them are a little over. Currently, the number that they always say is they base off the Medicare rates. The current rate that we're at right now is about Medicare plus 150%. This is proposing to go to Medicare plus 200%, which again is in line with most of the other communities around here. And as a couple people could tell you that have dealt with private ambulances, we are still far and again below what a private ambulance is. We had, as a story I mentioned during one of my budget presentations, one of my EMT's sons had to be transported for a breathing difficulty from one of the local clinics. I was transported from one of the cities by a private ambulance, breathing treatment, IV, and about a 6-mile transport. And the bill was just under $5,000. That same transport for us, with the same skills, same everything, would be about just under $2,000 for that. So it's like I'm not, it sounds like a big increase, but it's also because we have not done an increase in a long time, too. And we're certainly not asking for the moon. Some of the privates are charging Medicare plus 500% or more. Let's see, where else was I here? Again, it sounds like a big increase. In speaking with the billing company, when you take out the Medicare, Medicaid rates that are basically, those are set, we can bill out, but they will only pay us what their set fee is, and by law, we're not allowed to collect the difference. We would see probably an increase of about $60,000 a year. And that's what would be anticipated to come in for that. And again, I would ask that at least 26 of that during the budget considerations would be used to cover some of my expenses, some of my salary expenses and supply expenses, a minimum. I would love to see the rest of it go towards being able to provide a little bit of additional coverage with per diem guys on some of the long weekends when people aren't around, or we have low availability because of a holiday, or storm coverages, things like that. By no means does it even come close to giving me the 24-hour coverage that I'd mentioned in my budget, but it's a stopgap, but it would offset some of my concerns and my expenses right now. And like I said, again, these fees only apply to people that we take to the hospital. A lot of people don't realize that if the ambulance shows up, we don't charge you unless we put you in the ambulance and take you to the hospital. There is a provision in the law that allows us to charge for people that refuse transport. I do not propose that as part of this. I do not want to do anything that's going to discourage people from calling 911 when they need help. There are communities that charge for that. I don't think that's something we really want to get into. And it's certainly not the same amount off of this. And again, like I said, persons on fixed incomes, Medicare, Medicaid, those are fixed rates. When you see that line item that says adjustments and abatements, that's what that number is. That's basically what we can't charge for those people. And some of the abatements, again, there is a process for abatements. I believe you folks have talked about that a little bit. There is a written process. It's based on low-income HUD figures for the Fitchburg-Leominster area. If there is somebody that's in a financial need, and that there is a way for them to request an abatement on that. Like I said, again, I wish we didn't have to charge for it at all, but the nature of the beast of today is that we've got to at least offset our costs, and that's what I'm looking to do. Questions? Have any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ebersol.
What was the, for either the chief or the town manager, what was the cost of the new ambulance that we just bought?
New ambulance was $215,000, $215, $220. I should remember that off the top of my head, but It's been a year.
And what you have here for the capital down below at the bottom line is the 10-year,
That is actually that is the existing Rescue 1 that is still being paid off, I believe. That's the older ambulance
Okay.
that will become the spare.
because I think it's important when we look at the number with the surplus deficit, as the Finance Committee raised, you have to talk about the cost of the ambulance amortized over the period.
Yep.
The other item that's not here, that is not typically included in municipal budgeting at this point, but is the cost of retirement for the personnel that we will be paying when they retire. And what they're usually starting to require is we actually start putting some things in here. It all goes to justifying the rate increase that could, in future health benefits of retirees as well. So I guess I would support this increase and encourage a more regular rate increase instead of big jumps. And I mean, this is not although there are some people that do this on a regular service, it
Right.
just may be a better way to keep it on a regular flow.
I fully agree. It's probably gone too long, and a lot of the insurance companies balk at a sudden huge increase in the rates. They seem to accommodate smaller increases on a regular basis more, so.
Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Bertram.
While I appreciate the costs and that we need to recoup those costs, be honest, I'm having a hard time with the 30% increase. When I look at the base rates and I look at the comparison to the other communities, I think our base rate is significantly under what it needs to be. But I'm having a hard time with the additional costs in some of the other line items. If you look at the base rate for Lunenburg, for emergency base rate for an ALS 1, it's currently $635, and yet the surrounding communities seem to be in the $868 range. Air is $958. If you look at the base rate for the ALS 2, we're at $910. $1257, $1387. So we're definitely under on our base rates, as well as just the emergency base rate. But the other line items, I'm having a hard time with such a high increase, because I'm really trying to compare ourselves to the other communities, and I think, yes, it puts us in line with some of them. But I'm trying to look at the cost of air, which is the closest to us, and I think that jump on some of the other line items is too high.
Well, some of probably the better communities to compare would be some of the similar ones that are set up to us, like Sterling. Some of these towns are also running 24-hour coverage. They have some significantly higher costs that they have to deal with, too. Some of the towns that are probably more similar to us might be Boylston, Sterling, Townsend, that are more similar in makeup to what we are. And again, the rates we looked at were, one of the things the insurance companies looks at is reasonable and customary for that particular region that you're in, and that's what we looked at. So,
I think one thing that would be helpful for the board to consider is maybe whether you want to focus on covering the cost of the service or what the rates are to the end user. I think either one is reasonable, and I think the approach that we're taking is trying to cover the cost of the service. But if that doesn't make sense to you because of the impact to the user, then you could look at something else.
I wouldn't say it doesn't make sense, because it does make sense, but I'm also trying to consider the impact to the end user. Obviously, when you call 911 and you're looking for an ambulance, it's not the best situation to be in. And having gone through a traumatic event, and then to get a bill that's beyond, while they may not be on fixed incomes, we're all really on fixed incomes. I mean, when you get an unexpected expense, it throws your budget out of whack. And I think that to go 30% higher is a huge increase for individuals who have already suffered some type of trauma and that necessitated ambulance service. So I'm having a hard time with such a high increase. I absolutely agree that incremental increases make sense, and I think that we do have to get to a point where we're looking to cover our costs. But to me, this is too big a jump in one.
well, like I said, unfortunately, we probably, I don't know if you have the number exactly when the last increase was. I believe my predecessor asked in 2009 or 2010, and it did not go at that time.
Yeah, I think it was then, and at the time, the board did ask for for an analysis, something similar to the first page where we showed the cost of providing the service, and that just never got brought forward.
So it's been 5 years since we've increased the rates?
5 years since it's even been discussed.
Discussed.
So,
Yeah, and it was.
like I say, I wish I could say we didn't charge for anything. I honestly
That's
believe that
6%
we're providing an
more.
emergency service, and I hate to charge for it, but again, we need to offset what we're trying to do.
So I appreciate what the town manager said, because that's one of the things I was going to bring up. So I'm glad that she did in advance of that. And that is, on the one hand, we ask departments like your own, there are minimal places where you could bring in money. This happens to be, for your department, the big one. And you're putting it where we need to balance it against the fact that, number one, if we're calling it a fee, and I think that's one of the things that we talk about all the time, is that fees, as defined, at least to the best of my knowledge, are supposed to cover your costs. Well, if you, according to your own spreadsheet, we far outdid our costs if you look at the life of the program, even to today. So I could make the argument that it's a fair fee already. Comparing things to other town, I always find problematic, because somebody decides in their town, and then once one person, it's like a domino. Once one person drops, if everybody used let's compare it to other communities, then everybody would do it, and then that's what everybody does. I understand why you'd want to do it. Lastly, I think that it's something to reiterate that Mrs. Bertram said, is I have a tough time, two items. You want it to be fair to basically cover your costs. And yet you say that if somebody calls the ambulance, but they don't get in it, you won't charge them. But you still had the time, you still had the vehicle, depending on where they are, you still had the EMTs. So in a logical, fair way, and this is not a criticism to you, just that evaluation, I don't see that really works. If you only make the people who actually use it, I think it's so easy, and I'm sorry if this is a little editorial, but I think it's so easy in today's health insurance environment that because the health insurance for most people pays this, that we don't look at the costs and we don't look where the costs are coming from. And so we don't, to cover something beyond what it costs us to do it, I have a problem with, because I believe what you said, that I think we should be able to do it. At the very least, we should not make money off people's bad fortune of needing an ambulance. And so I do have a difficult time. If I had to choose between the two different ways of evaluating this, between what other towns do or covering our costs, me personally, I'd rather cover our costs. And it looks like to me we are covering our costs.
Well, like I say, it has gone up, and as you can see, what we've been covering has been decreasing. This year, we seem to be up. And some of that may be more active, that we have been much busier. We're on track for a busy fiscal year on the ambulance. I'll mention something else with the refusal, and just to look at it how we look at it too. Like you said, somebody calls for the ambulance. Now, I'll use the analogy, say you're out riding your bike, fall off your bike, you get injured, you're good. Somebody went by and said, gee, somebody got hit by a car, they fell off the bike. We get called with the ambulance, we show up. Now, by law, you've got injuries, we have to get a refusal on you. Would you want to get charged for that? You didn't call.
Right.
You're really fine, but by law now, we have to get that refusal because someone else called us. We get a lot of our calls are like that. We don't get a lot that the person calls and then changes their mind. It's usually a family member that calls. It may be a motor vehicle accident that somebody went by, it's unknown injuries, we get sent, and then you get there, and they may have a complaint, or something, but they don't want to go. By law, we have to get that refusal off of them, that's where that becomes, a sticky situation. Charging, I don't want people to get away from that. I don't want you to think that there's a ton of people that are calling 911 saying I want the ambulance and then get this done. I don't want to go now. That's usually not the case.
How many are you talking about the runs that you don't transport a year?
I want to say, the last time I did the numbers, probably, of counting the ambulance, like when we go out and help somebody back into bed, they fell or something, it's probably about 25% of our total runs we may not transport on. So somewhere in that neighborhood.
So that the runs here are transported runs?
No, those are total. Those do not.
Right, so 25%
Trying
of
to,
these.
25% of those are probably the actual transport. 75% of those are the actual transports. Because there are runs. Well, a lot of runs we go out, someone's fallen, they're not hurt, they need help getting up. We go out and do that. Things like that. So.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm on the contrary thought on this one in a way. What I'm hearing is that we have not increased fees, for 6 or so years, and that might average out to a 5 or 6% increase over that time. Yes, 30% sounds like sticker shock, but I'm not sure that our town can solve the healthcare costs are out of control issue all by ourselves. If you factored in the capital expense, which we don't, I mean, we have it on here for this one unit, but normally the capital expense is handled in a different way. Here's a service that we provide where, loosely defined, the users pay for it as opposed to the taxpayers as a base. I don't find a 6% a year increase outrageous.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to understand, because looking at fiscal 11 and fiscal 12, the runs is comparable, 769 to 779, but yet when you look at the surplus or deficit, they're astronomically different. So is it a different type of transport that occurred?
Some of that may be a difference of how many, a simple BLS transport, somebody broken arm, broken leg, I don't feel good, take me to the hospital. Some of those, it's a BLS call, it's going to be charged at a lesser rate. That may be a particular case of that we had a lot more of those than ALS calls. Usually they're split about half and half.
And I guess that goes back to my point to Tom's point about covering the cost of the service. If we're not charging enough for the ALS, for example, and we're not actually covering our costs, then I think we've got to address that. So I'd like to really understand the disparity between, a surplus of 71,000 in fiscal 11 and a deficit of 2,000 in fiscal 12, but yet you're talking a difference of 10 calls. So I think we need to really kind of figure out what is that difference and why. Because if we're not charging enough for a particular call, then I absolutely would entertain, increasing that. But if you look at fiscal 10, fiscal 11, and fiscal this current fiscal year, we are covering our costs, even if you factor in the capital costs. So while I appreciate that we need to find, money to offset the costs, other costs of the department, I believe that fees should be for the cost of the service and not to offset other costs. And I think when we look at costs, that's what we should be aiming for.
On those particular years, I mean, I honestly don't have a good answer for that, because trying to track, at one time we were able to track an ALS call versus a BLS call. Since we've merged into with the regional dispatch, it's a little more difficult to do now, the way they code the calls. And I would suspect going back in that time frame, it was probably we had much more BLS calls. Or there's still ones that we're still chasing for money that we just haven't seen, for whatever reason, we didn't get the revenue on. There's some that we're still chasing. We have a collection agency, they still do pursue them. Some of them, they trickle in here and there.
Just quickly, can you tell me the difference in the nomenclature? What's a BLS and ALS?
BLS is a strictly transport, oxygen, spinal immobilization, if needed, cervical collar, things like that. Karen, you want to fill in on ALS 1 and ALS 2? You can explain that better than I can.
ALS 1 is considered what we are. We're considered an intermediate service. We do not run a paramedic service. We have intermediates and paramedics who, on our service, will act as intermediates. They can start lines, intravenous, and they can do intubation, and that's all they can do. Paramedic services can do EKG monitoring. They can do EKG tracings, 12 leads. They can push medications, stuff like that. ALS 1 is a skill an intermediate can do, such as starting an intravenous. One skill, that's considered an ALS. An ALS assessment, if I'm an intermediate, I do an assessment and I start an intravenous, that's an ALS 1 call. If we have paramedics come in, they can push medications. If they push 2 or more medications, or they use a manual defibrillator, which we don't have, if they do monitoring of an ET tube or an, yeah,
ET tube.
ET tube.
Yeah, or an advanced airway.
Advanced airway, that's considered an ALS too, because it's a higher level of the ALS care.
Yeah, that actually gave me more than I was, I
I
just wanted to know what BLS and ALS stood for, but I think it's basic life service and.
Advanced life
Advanced,
services, yes.
right.
That's what I was looking
Right.
for. Okay, but thank you, because that would have been my next question. so.
Not everybody gets, the higher rate.
Right.
Depends on what the nature of the medical emergency was
Sure.
and what the care needed to be provided to them, hence the different rates.
Now, talking about the numbers on the charts, I'm a little concerned, well, first of all, I'm a little confused, and then I'm a little concerned about the numbers on FY14. Because at the top of the chart, it says through March 31st, but then the total EMS runs is through January 31st.
The simple answer on that is to when I pull them out of the dispatch computer, the runs have to be validated, and that's done by Chief Marino and one of my other people, and they haven't been validated through, they've only been validated up to February 1st. So I couldn't add those in yet. for
So
those
there's
runs.
5 months left on, no, there's 6 months left on that.
From that one, yes, it'd be
5.
5.
5 months,
Yep.
yeah. Because that
Yeah.
looks like,
That was, yeah, there is a difference there, because I could not get all those runs.
looks like a huge number. I mean, 5 months.
With this busy year, so,
How did you, let me ask you this basic question. How did you come up with the numbers that you came up with? Were they constructed by what your costs are? Or were they more of an evaluation of where the other towns are and it's a percentage increase?
basically, it's an assessment of where the other communities were, and that looking at what most, reasonable and customary charge for communities similar to us. That's what we went off of. And that rather than, I'm not even sure if legally you can piecemeal individual rates, or if you change one, you have to change both. That I honestly don't have an answer to that one. I was sort of thought it was my understanding that usually when you go up on all of them.
Okay.
To that, it's not so much that percentage, it's based off the Medicare rate. That's what usually most of the services look at, is it's Medicare plus a certain percentage, and that's how they base it off that. So that's what we looked at. The personnel numbers are basically, because again, we're firefighter EMT, most everybody's firefighter EMTs, we do everything. So that's based off of our, basically half the career salary and the line item for EMTs, the call EMTs in the budget. That's what we use for that figure when we put that together.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ebersol?
Couple of things that, if you take that 466 through January and you annualize it, it's about 798, so it's up, but not dramatically so. If you look at fiscal 13 and say you do 75% of the runs, that's 583, and that turns out we're collecting, net collection, $387 a run. That's after the billing expenses and adjustments and stuff like that. So when we look about what they're charging, what we actually get at the end, a lot of it becomes, if a lot of the patients that are transported are Medicare, we're going to get the Medicare rate, and we're going to write off because we don't do balanced billing.
Right.
So what I would be interested in is an estimate of where we're billing. It doesn't change my opinion that I believe we need to increase rates, and that I don't believe we have all the costs here because we're not doing the cost of retirement. You really should be taking, there's no cost here for costs of the building, effectively the heat and the bay and other things like that for the building that could be allocated to this, sort of the real cost accounting for this. So I think that while it looks like we've made money, I personally think that this is a losing proposition. You could certainly have some argument to say that 25% that we're not charging is something that should be something the town's paying and not the charge here. So there may need to be some more additional analysis, but I think that there needs to be an increase in order to cover the costs that really aren't on.
When we originally looked at the numbers, we were anticipating about a $77,000 roughly increase a year. And when they calculated when they estimated again based on past years, when you take out the Medicare, Medicaid adjustments, that's where they came down to around $60,000. But that's what, based on, the billing company's analysis of our, past run activity.
Chief, are there towns of our composition that don't have any ambulance service?
There are, you define not have an ambulance service. Pretty much every town is covered by somebody.
Town
whether it's a
doesn't run it.
municipal
That the town doesn't run it?
Or it's a private. Around here, not our size that I can think of, other than maybe Dunstable. That's about the closest one I could think of. Everybody else is municipal. They're either third service or they're part of the fire service. And again, part of this too is, this is also, you're getting a dual service from firefighters and EMTs. Depending on what the call is what we handle it. Instead of just having firefighters do firefighting only, they're providing a dual service. So
One of
it's
the
something to consider, that you're getting more bang for your buck having dual trained people as well, because you're always still going to need a fire department too. And again, like we said, our rates are still significantly less than what you would be getting out of a private ambulance.
Well, that's why I'm thinking that maybe the fact that, as I mentioned when I spoke earlier, that we're talking about fees, because in other aspects of other departments, fees are very clearly defined. And maybe that's the stumbling point here. Maybe the stumbling point is that these really aren't ambulance fees, but really we offer an ambulance service, which really we're not looking to necessarily recoup our costs. We're looking to provide a first-class service and save people in the town money that if they had to go privately.
Absolutely.
So in that regard, I agree with Mr. Toll, who says that really, since it's user paid for,
Right.
maybe it's a matter of perspective of how to look at this.
Right.
And maybe that's, because I remember when Chief Glennie, your predecessor, was here, and I said the same thing I said this evening about fees. And I think that as I kind of analyze it in my head more, I think that's where the problem is. I shouldn't be thinking them as fees, as building permit fees are assessed. Those are different.
It's a user fee more
Well,
than-
it's a service. We actually run something
Right.
that necessarily, we are not saying that we're going to cover our costs, that we are saying it's going to subsidize some of the other things that your department
Right.
does. And maybe we shouldn't be, and this is me speaking, maybe we shouldn't be hesitant to say that. Maybe that's what we are doing openly, whereas other places, we can't do that with fees. It's very clear you can't do that with fees. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think along that line, and it's kind of where I was trying to go, and you just helped me crystallize my thought. It's, to me, when you look at the revenue expense equation for the whole town, there are so few opportunities for the revenue side of the equation. I mean, basically, property taxes are major revenue, and we have several expenses. It would seem to me that when we look at revenue opportunities, we should at the very least be charging the market rate for that service.
I still am having a hard time with this increase. I think we do have a responsibility to cover our costs, but when we talk about a service, an ambulance is a life-saving service. It's not as if it's an optional service. If you're calling an ambulance and you're getting advanced life support, it's not because you wanted to be there and because you said, hey, I'm going to try out Lunenburg's ambulance service. And I'm having a real hard time. While I appreciate that we have to look at innovative ways to cover our costs, I don't believe that the ambulance service is the place to do that. I think that I would need more analysis, and I think Mr. Ebasal brought up some good points about talking about the cost of the building, the cost of salaries. The only thing we're looking at in this equation is the capital for the ambulance itself. And if we were to look at an analysis that included those, and it showed that we did have a deficit, then I would be looking at covering that cost. But I don't want to look at it as this is an opportunity to increase revenue, because I think in this particular instance, while I would be open to that in other areas, but for an ambulance service, I have a real hard time with that, and I would be opposed to this increase as proposed.
We can certainly do the additional analysis. I think we picked what we picked with respect to capital and just the ambulance, because that was a direct cost. The cost of the building, I mean, the building is going to be there regardless of whether it has the ambulance or it has the fire trucks. It certainly makes sense from a business model to include it, as does OPEB. retirement costs and retiree health insurance costs. But since we are not currently setting aside money to pay that, to include it would sort of skew it in the other direction. I would still argue we could identify what those are potentially with the data we have, but if we're not going to set it aside, I'd hate to include it. But the building, we certainly could, and I think we easily would be back in the red again.
And isn't it true that the capital for the ambulance is not in here? Because that's the Rescue 1 unit. I think
Okay.
the ambulance came out of the capital planning process, which does not show up in the department budgets. Am I correct?
This was for the old ambulance.
The number you gave me was for Rescue 1, which I assumed you meant that was
Right.
Rescue 1. The
Right,
2008 unit.
and we're not yet paying for the new ambulance.
Okay,
it's
so
not
that should
included
be in there.
This is the debt service.
on the
on the existing
on the
one,
existing-
right, so-
existing debt service. In fiscal 15, we would have both ambulances, because we'd have 2 years left of Rescue 1 paid off in 17, or it won't be Rescue 1, it'll be Rescue 2, but,
So
and then
we-
we'll have the new ambulance.
We have 2 ambulances,
We
that
run
we
2
would be
ambulances.
paying
One is the
for.
primary, one is a backup.
so we always will have one debt service, or most likely,
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to the point where we just have
just one.
one.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I'd certainly offer, the chief and the town manager can work on this, but I offer my assistance on revamping this and coming back again. I have a few more questions on the insurance. I think that would help. The other question is this the amount that's charged? It's not the amount collected in that month, the year?
That would be what is charged out.
Okay, all
Yes.
right, good.
Right, that's true. It's not
What- which
representative
number?
of collections.
Collections.
Which number are you looking at?
If you look at
The
net
revenue.
revenue, that's the net revenue to be collected, not necessarily what we have collected.
So it is apples and apples to look at that, and if you have something that's not collectible because we did an adjustment or an abatement, it
An
shows up
abatement.
above bad debt.
But
would
how
be
much, right, but we handle ambulance
And it's been
abatements.
very
So
few.
there've
Right,
been very
so-
few.
The right.
So the adjustments aren't going to be, they're going to be well under 1%.
Right, the abatement's not.
Abatements will be.
That.
Right.
The
Excuse me, not that
adjustments
many.
are adjustments from the insurance.
Abatements,
Right,
the
Medicare,
abatements, I
Medicaid,
meant,
right.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we include, I'd be interested in the, whatever kind of adjustments to this spreadsheet that we're looking at. But if we are talking now, the inclusion of the other ambulance debt service on here, starting next year, or this upcoming fiscal year, then I think, even on a cover your cost methodology, I think you could say that it could be, it's justified. Because that service is going to be how much a year of the $220,000?
Isn't that a
You
gift?
Well, it would be at least double.
Okay.
I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on how long we're financing it for.
But we'll cover, it'll
but-
be 2 years that
I
we
mean-
have
Not
to carry
financing.
Yeah,
to.
that's a
We're not
cash purchase,
financing.
right,
Right,
yeah.
we're not, that's why I'm drawing a blank on how long we're financing.
Okay, so
it.
well, okay,
But we
but.
still
but
would amortize.
We'd have to
the
amortize
cost.
it,
Right,
right.
right.
So however accounting-wise you do it, I mean, I think at that point, for those 2 years that you have double, including what's already here, I think you could easily make the case that even to keep the service running, because the life of a new new ambulance is how long?
I'm estimating, hopefully with the newer chassis on the new truck, the heavier chassis, 12 years.
12
Is what
years.
I'm looking at.
Okay.
6
So-
years front line, 6 years backup.
But for 2 years, we'll have 2 ambulance fees, but then I believe our plan is that we will not purchase another one until the one we're purchasing now is paid off. Is that correct? Or are we going to be carrying a fee for 2 ambulances for, just for that 2 years, or is that going to be the model going forward?
Well, in the analysis, we would amortize the cost of the equipment over the life of the equipment. So
Okay.
regardless of whether it was an actual cash payment in that year, we'd still have the expense, the equipment expense shown.
The assumption is Rescue 1 we won't need to buy another one until 10 years from now.
2018, the truck will be 10, it's an older truck, lighter truck. My plan would be 2018 to replace that one. We used to go on a 5 and 10 year cycle, and I'm trying to move to a 6 and 12, but that's using the heavier chassis on the vehicle.
Exactly.
get a little more life out of it.
Okay. So I think, so you're going to, was it decided you're going to work with these and adjust this spreadsheet with
Yep.
those numbers?
Yep.
And I think and then we'll make a decision at that point.
Okay.
I appreciate, one thing I want to reiterate, and I didn't think I said it, but I think everybody else did. I do agree that not letting it go 6 years, not that you were here 6 years ago, and I don't remember if it was passed or not, but I think not letting it go and doing it incrementally is certainly a whole lot easier.
Fully agree.
And whatever templates we're using to justify these spreadsheets, I mean, if we save the template and just plug in the numbers, that would be great. I thank you both.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, a request to authorize the chair to send the letter to the MPO in support of the Summer Street project. So that letter that was written by Paula is in everybody received it and it's in the packet. I did not respond to your email because I did not see anything to change. So
Okay.
I probably should have said that to make it perfectly clear that that was true. So,
And it was actually drafted to include all of your signatures. I know the item says to authorize the chair, but it probably does make sense to have
Yep.
more signatures
Sure.
on it.
did everybody have a chance to read it? Does anybody have anything they want to say or change or modify? If not, I say that I'd entertain a motion about the letter.
I move we support the letter, sign it, and send it off to the Montechusett Regional Planning Commission in support of the reconstruction of Summer and North Streets.
Second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Excellent letter, Mrs. Bertram.
Thank you.
The review of the town manager evaluation, self-evaluation. What? Oh, so 4 was a request to authorize the chair to sign the project scope and budget agreement with the MSBA, but we were informed by the superintendent that we do not have that agreement in hand yet, so we cannot authorize it to be signed since we can't even see it.
Well, you could.
We will not be authorizing the chair to sign anything that we cannot see, despite the town manager's. Okay, it's all yours, self-evaluation.
Okay, so as I do every year, go through the same process that you do, using the same form that you do with regard to evaluation. So I did go through that process this year, and you have a copy of the results of that process. In terms of relationships with the board, I gave myself 36 out of 50. The board composite for the same was 40.8. Fiscal management, 30 out of 40. The board composite was 35.8. Community and public relations, 29 out of 40, and the board composite was 32.4 out of 40. Personnel administration, 25 out of 45. The board composite was 29.2. And then professional skills and abilities, 33 out of 50. The board composite was 40.4. The overall rating that I gave myself was 153. The board composite was 178.6. The next section is a place to comment on either ones or fives. I didn't give myself any of those, so there's no comment, not to get out of doing it, but I don't think don't necessarily agree that I'm outstanding or unsatisfactory on anything, so. The narration, there's a question, what has the town manager done well? I mentioned that I think I do a good job putting together the financial forecast and the budget documents. You know, I've been here 7.5 years now. I haven't had an easy budget year in any of the years, but I think we've always had a solid budget to review, that people have had the data that they've needed to review the budget, make decisions. And so I'm happy that we've been able to do that. I think town meeting has always gone smoothly. There's a lot more involved in that process than just what I do. I get a lot of help from different departments, but we're able to put together good presentations, have just made some changes to the format. I think it's easier for people attending to follow and to participate in the process. We put a lot of effort into putting handouts together, especially the town accountant and I, making sure that people are following at different levels. They like to see different data. We like to make sure, think through how people would be evaluating the spending that we do and make sure that they can tie out what we're asking them to approve in a variety of different ways. I also mentioned that I think I've done a good job identifying ways to be innovative and efficient. The regional dispatch, municipal electric aggregation, the solar projects, and most recently the land use director position. We have some additional opportunities under investigation, including regional animal control, regional lockup facility, municipal towing contract, continually looking at departments to find better ways to organize and be more efficient. And, we've, I think, made a lot of improvements at a time where our staff is at a very low point in terms of numbers. We still have a number of fairly new department heads, so that presents challenges as well. I think all of our department heads, especially our new department heads, are doing really well. Not to say that ones who have been here for a long time aren't, but the newer department heads have really made some great improvements, I think, to our process. What could the town manager do better? One thing that does bother me is I don't feel like I give you as much time with the agenda packets for the meetings. I'd like to have a better schedule so you know more in advance of more than a few days what's going to be on the agenda. I know that means that people are going to have to tighten up their own processes, and some people are just going to have to wait until the next meeting, which I don't think is a huge issue because you meet for the most part every week. And I think once we get people into that cycle, that they know if you want something on a Tuesday agenda, you need to have it in final format on such and such a date. If it's not ready, it's going to the next agenda. When we keep having emergencies, all of a sudden they're not really emergencies, it's just lack of planning. So I would like to be able to tighten up that process, because it's not fair to give you something with a couple of days of notice to review it, because you all have other jobs that you do and you need time to evaluate. Another thing that I think we could do better would be with department goals. I did actually just today, I have 7 department heads that report directly to me. I did do an annual evaluation on all 7 of them. I did 5 last week and 2 this week. And I have written evaluations that I've put together, which include goals. In some cases, we're still working out the final wording of the goals, but the goals document, as long as they're department goals and they're not personal goals, will be shared with the board. They will provide quarterly written reports to me, which will be shared with the board on progress. And twice a year, unless there's a reason they should come more frequently, they will come and present status on their goals. I will send you out the form that I used if you're interested in seeing that, and we'll formalize that process. I think it's good for everybody. One of the things that I talked about with all of the department heads is, it's difficult for them to come and make presentations. It's not an easy thing. It's not, if you don't do it regularly, it's difficult. But because of the nature of our business, that people rely on these individuals to be knowledgeable about their jobs, to to know that they're giving you the best information, and so you need to know who they are. And you know that by seeing them in a variety of different settings, but they need to be coming here more often. And I think lastly, I still would like to, I use the word push more work out of the office and have it done by departments. I mean, I am the town manager. I am in charge of all of the departments, but I'm also the finance director, and I'm the personnel director, and I'm the procurement officer. So I'm a department head in a lot of senses, too, not necessarily because I want to be, but because we've made some cuts in certain areas, and those have fallen. So I still need to find a way to push some of that out, because it's difficult to be both a full-time department manager and then manager of the town as well. What could the board do to help the town manager, and what could the town manager do to help the board? What I mentioned that the board could do to help the town manager would be, it would be helpful for us to sit down as a group in a workshop setting to talk about the evaluation. We present the composite evaluation, but you don't necessarily see the individual evaluations, which I'm happy to share, because the comments, the individual comments that you make sort of get watered down in the composite. And the individual comments and the individual assessments that you make are as important as the composite, and I think it would be helpful for everybody to have an opportunity to understand what people think is working well, what they think needs some additional work, because we all need to be on the same page. Some of the comments, when I read through them, I felt like there really was just a difference of opinion in some certain things. And I mentioned the capital planning committee and process, because that was one comment that jumped out, that when I read one of the comments, I felt, gee, I don't even agree with that philosophy, that I don't even think that that's how the process is supposed to work. And I thought, I need to understand, if you all think that that's how the process is supposed to work, it was just something one person wrote, then I need to change the way that I'm thinking, because I want to be working the process the way that you think it should be worked. So that was just an example of why I think it would be helpful to sit down and talk about those things. And then what I think I could do to help the board, I mentioned again, better preparation for the board meetings, having agenda packets in a more timely manner. Suggestions for future goals, performance measurements for departments. It's something I'd still like to do. I think we've made a teeny amount of progress. I'd like to move that along. Updating job descriptions, which we're actually pretty close to finishing with most departments. For some of or actually for union positions, those also have to be approved by the union, so that's an ongoing process. But position descriptions are so important for a variety of reasons, and the ones that we have really are outdated. So we need to bring those current. Finishing updating the policies and procedures. And another thing that I added actually just today was either reviewing or establishing appointment procedures. And one thing that I would like to suggest, because we're coming up on, our appointments are July 1st, I really would like the board to consider holding over appointments for a 30-day period, and in the month of July, spending a lot of time talking about appointments and fixing problems that we have, because there are a number of problems that have come up that I think if we could just take a group at a time and talk through those and make the appointments and agree to have them done by the end of July, I think we could do a better job than just reappointing and saying, oh, we'll get to that, we'll fix that, and then 6 months later we still haven't done it, but now we're doing the budget and you're doing your licenses and those things. So that's what I have to offer.
Any comments from the board?
My comment is that you're definitely a tougher rater than a lot of us, because there are definitely some areas that I think that you do deserve a 5, and I think you've acknowledged the areas that you need to do work in. So I think that your ethics and your ability to work through the town's business is unquestioned. And I think you already know your areas of improvement. So I think I appreciate in an evaluation process where there's an agreement on the area, even the ranges on all the different things, it's pretty consistent. So I think we're on the same wavelength, but I think you're a tougher grader than a lot of us.
I still would have given myself my bonus, so.
Okay.
I know I'm revamping my whole scoring system for next year. Clearly, I took the same takeaway as you, but.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Ebersol. Out of 45 items, to have none as outstanding, I think that's an extremely tough marker. But at the same time, I think a lot of the suggestions are excellent ones, and I very much look forward to working through a workshop and through a lot of Ms. Spidell's ideas and working for a much better tool that actually helps us move where we need to go.
Any comment? Yes, I think that aside from the lower scoring, I think that proportionally it is equivalent. So I think that's a good, that's the takeaway for me. And the written comments, I think are very appropriate. And I think definitely we want to address how to implement them, and certainly the discussion about the town manager's roles and responsibilities, because I think we all have certain viewpoints about how we see that working, and if the town manager hears 5 different opinions, it doesn't help. We really need to at least establish among ourselves what we believe the roles and responsibilities are as best we can.
Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Bertram.
I just want to add that, that's one of the things that I've seen about this is I understand that the composite is public, but we have never talked as a group about our individual perspectives, and sometimes they're very different. So I think having that conversation will be a great tool moving forward, because I think we do all have to understand where each other are coming from. We all meet with the town manager and go through it, but as Mr. Alonso said, it's 5 different people with sometimes very different perspectives on what's going on, and that's very hard, and we have never taken the opportunity to talk as a group, which I think we do have to do.
And I would encourage people, they are available, although they're not available to the public. All of our individuals are available to you, and you just have to ask the town manager, and she can distribute them. So if you want to read them.
Yeah, and I can just do that. So you don't have to ask me individually to do that. But, I think in terms of having a workshop, perhaps I can just put together a spreadsheet that has the individual evaluations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it doesn't say whose it is. I mean, because then if we're talking about it at a workshop, it's a public document.
Right.
And that way, there's...
We can look at the area that needs to be looked at for everybody's expectations, because if somebody's expecting you to do one thing when you don't expect to do it, well, we should have that discussion. Either we should or we shouldn't.
Right.
And one of the things I'd like to do, and there's only one part of this process that that I don't think is a fair assessment of the process. And that is that the town manager gets to do the self-evaluation after hearing and reading all of ours. That seems to be that's not a fair way of assessing it. I think that they should be done simultaneously so that they are exchanged at that point. Because I think you get a fairer assessment of what somebody believes they're doing on their own, instead of, looking at other people's and saying how do I feel about those? Right. So I don't know, and I'm not saying you do this. I think it's human nature. I mean, I wonder how much of the self-evaluation is evaluating the scores that you got from us, or really just taking the document and assessing it for yourself. And again, it's not even anything conscious that you'd be able to say, no, I didn't do that, or yes, I did. I just think it would be fair if they're both done at the same time. So I think that it may actually be dictated in the charter what the procedure is, but if we can maybe go to that, I think it may be better. That's just something, food for thought for conversation. Further discussion on the Board of Selectmen policies and procedures. We're going to do that at the end of this meeting, and we won't be televised, but one of the things I'd like to do is preempt what we had talked about last week and address what the town manager brought up with the appointment process. That's on our list anyway, and because July 1st is coming up, if we can start that conversation, so we can get that underway, maybe we can pull that policy together and then actually apply it for the reappointments. I don't know how the board feels about that, but that's what I propose.
I thought, and maybe I'm mistaken, but I thought we had, at our workshop, we had adopted a reappointment form, and that we didn't need to revisit that policy. But am I hearing that we do need to revisit
Well,
that?
I think there are some things that the town manager talked about as far as, she wasn't here, of course, last week when we talked about the
Reappointment
submitted,
form.
the reappointment form, and I think that's something maybe it's doesn't go beyond today. I don't know. Let's talk about that and address that.
Well, you did approve that form at the last meeting, but, I mean, it would be difficult for us to even use that form unless we gave ourselves a little more time.
Oh,
Right,
absolutely.
right,
Absolutely.
But there are a few things that I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
With regard to appointments.
Okay, minutes. Do we have minutes?
Yes.
Oh. And warrants. One accounts payable warrant in the amount of $407,712.79. And action file issues.
Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Bertram.
I have a couple of them. The first is the Tennessee gas pipeline. I don't know if any of you have been approached by people relative to this issue. We had received a notice in the action file that there was an upgrade of an existing line, but there seems to be some question as to whether that's the case or there's a new line in different locations proposed, exactly what type of gas this is carrying, whether it's frack gas or whether it is natural gas, the natural gas that's currently through the town. But I think we need more information about this issue, and I think we need to address it as a community. I received a copy of an email today that an individual has indicated that this line is now going to go through the headwaters of the Mulpus, through conservation land. I think we need to get in front of this and request more information about exactly what these upgrades are, and we need to do that fairly quickly.
I have gotten some correspondence, and actually even at the Public Safety Memorial on Sunday, somebody approached me and asked me about it. So I know other towns have been talking about it, Pepperell, Groton. Of course, anything that comes through here, the company, we're talking about the Tennessee Gas Company, but there's
Kinder Morgan.
Kinder Morgan is the larger corporation. Will have to come to us anyway. What I would, at this point, what I would like is to, and I'm glad you're bringing it up now, is that people out there listening should pay close attention, because when they do have this first public hearing, I would encourage everybody in the town, whether or not your property is in abutting or going through your property as a proposition for the location of the pipeline, that everybody in the town be involved, because I'm sure there's going to be strong feelings on all different, from all different perspectives on this, and we want to get the large towns full view on this and full comment on it. We haven't gotten any indication from Kinder Morgan when they're coming, but obviously nothing can happen here without them doing that. I did hear they are going door to door at some places, trying to talk to, property owners. While I try not to color that with anything, I think it really is kind of premature that they would do that without coming to the town first and proposing what they are doing. I don't know if it's a strategy particularly, but I am wary of those kind of tactics. So I would say thank you for bringing it up, and everybody should keep in tune for this as it progresses across all of Massachusetts, of course. I think the Boston Globe had an article about where the proposed pipeline would be going. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So-
And at this point, it's north of Lunenburg, but there is growing opposition from various towns, so therefore we didn't know whether they would then move the line down into another town. So we have to be aware of what's
Yes.
going on in our town and around our town.
Right. So right now, it's very preliminary. We don't even know where it's going to go, but we definitely want to make sure we keep our eye on it, because this is going to be, with a lot of people, a hot button issue again on both sides, I believe.
Right, and I have also heard that people they are going door to door, so that obviously raises the level of concern, and that we need to make sure we know when the public hearings are and exactly what's going on. The second thing I wanted to bring up is the stormwater discussion. I've brought this up before. I think this is also an issue that we need to get in front of, and I have raised it as a citizen to the planning board. As these developments are going forward and more stormwater structures are proposed and groundwater infiltration systems are proposed, that becomes the responsibility of the community. And I had asked, or maybe Mr. Matthews at the time had suggested that could we standardize the approaches? Could we? And I was informed by the planning board that really wasn't an option. Yet I have found other communities have done exactly that. I've actually found bylaws that other communities have done that. I've also found communities that have initiated a stormwater utility fee, and that will help offset some of these costs. Some of these large developments now need suction dredging. They need a vacuum unit to go in and clean these. The Elmwood Road subdivision is going to need to be cleaned 4 times a year. We don't have the manpower nor the equipment to manage these structures. So we really need a joint meeting with the planning board and the DPW director to get in front of this issue. So I would like to make sure that happens. And all of these developments that are coming before us have stormwater issues. We are an MS4, and this is an issue that we're going to have to address. And unfortunately, it's a very, very expensive proposition. And as we continue to struggle with the budget and balancing things, this is going to become a big money issue. And finally, I just wanted to mention, I did attend the Economic Development Conference at Mount Wachusett Community College last week. It was a great discussion, a lot of useful information, and the planning board chair talked about this briefly last night because 2 members of the planning board attended as well. But the main goal of the meeting, or the main topic of the meeting, is the need to approach economic development regionally versus as each individual community. And Mayor Wong and Mazzarella, as well as Mayor Hawk, all talked about getting together with the small communities and identifying assets, identifying land, and trying to unify and market a region versus a town. So there was a lot of information, and I'm very excited for the land use director, and hopefully that will be something that they take the ball and run with. But I think as a community, as we talk about the Passios building, as we talk about, the Ritter or other buildings, there was a lot of information at this seminar that could be useful. But the biggest thing is to identify our own assets as a community and then market those assets. Proximity to Fitchburg State College, proximity to Mount Wachusett. What is our workforce? What is our makeup of our workforce? A number of different strategies that they recommended that I think we need to look into. And that's all I have.
Any other action filed issues?
Mr. Chairman, a week ago, the DPW director briefed us on the intersection of Mulpus and Townsend Harbor and indicated that the remediation of the issues was a high priority and was going to be addressed, I thought I heard this week. And I just wanted to point out that no activity has gone on since that meeting at all. And
they were there today. They haven't paid. They were there doing work today. They were putting up signs. The signage went up on 2 of the intersections.
Okay.
Only because I saw them working. So.
Okay. Well, I checked on the way over, but I guess I missed the sign they put up. But I just felt that we should, if it's going to be delayed, it is a critical intersection. We have talked about it as a critical intersection. And I think if there's going to be a delay or if the plans have changed, we need to be notified as soon as possible.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple asking for updates for next week. The tax title update for what the treasurer's been able to do on properties. And action on, because there was a couple of properties that are in bankruptcy and dealing with the IRS and things like that. Just the status of some of the ones that may not be in her action. There was one property that we talked about, the IRS has a lien on.
Yeah, and we actually did receive payment on that, so I'll put that together.
Okay, great. And then the garage in the center of town, just making sure we keep coming back to that, the status of the old gas station garage. I'm going back, way back.
Okay, committee reports, Board of Health,
No report?
building reuse.
Just on the building reuse, we have scheduled a joint meeting with the planning board for the 18th of June. It's becoming more and more evident that it's important for the building reuse committee to work very closely with various other entities in the town, particularly the planning board, but in addition, the historical commission, the school building committee, et cetera. Our objective, and I think it's important to note this, that the objective of the Building Reuse Committee, and it's a large group of 9 people that are working very hard, but it includes, architects, it includes engineers, it includes people that are very much working on a lot of the issues that are coming up as questions now. But our objective is to make sure that the buildings in our charge, the buildings that the town owns that we've been asked to look for, potential alternate uses are not encumbered in the meantime, so that we're working with the planning board to ensure that the zoning is the best possible zoning to give us the most options as a town, for the historical commission to weigh in on what's important to the town, obviously, and we don't want to do anything that would jeopardize the historical value of the town, but we also don't want to have encumbrances on the properties as we try to make them more useful to the town. At last night's planning meeting, which I didn't see live, but it was on YouTube it was up late last night, and I watched it. There was a discussion of the road and where that road is exactly, and I'm sure in our update, Mrs. Bertram will talk a little bit about the planning board. But I think it's important for people to understand how all these pieces work together, and how it's important that we get in front of it and understand that decisions that might be minor decisions in one opportunity could be major decisions in another. And our board, our committee is very, very willing to work with whoever we need to work with. One of the things I brought up last week, and then I'll conclude, is that it's very important for us to get some property lines drawn to understand exactly where these properties are, so we can begin to determine what the marketability is. We have people on the committee or available to the committee that are real estate people and understand the market, et cetera. So we are working towards that. Anybody that has any input, we'd love to hear it, but we're trying to stay in front of that.
Excellent, thank you. Capital planning is hiatus.
Right.
Finance committee.
Meets Thursday night. No report since last meeting.
Library Board of Trustees.
No report?
I guess a very late-breaking announcement. I should thank the library, the Friends of the Library, for a very excellent book and bake sale this past Saturday, too. So that really was crowded. I went there when it opened at 8:30, and the whole parking lot was full, and I had to park behind the Brooks house, and that's how many people were there already, so. Really,
and actually, you triggered, somebody had told me that they made over $800 on the bake sale and in the thousands of dollars on the book sale, so it was a very successful, as you said.
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
And some of the baked goods were excellent. MPO.
No update, however, the meeting that was scheduled for the 18th has been moved to the 25th. And I can actually attend that meeting.
Oh, excellent. Good.
So.
Thank you. Planning board.
The planning board meeting, the Highfield Village, was continued to June 23rd. A lot of the meetings centered on an overview of the middle school, high school project, and the peer review associated with that, which was done by Anthony Cleaves of Whitman and Bingham. In his review, Mr. Cleaves identified 100 points within the plan that needed to be addressed, or actually not all of them, but most of them. 39 of those points centered around stormwater and I'm going to make an editorial note that, we as a community and the DPW director as our stormwater manager really need to look at that, because a number of concerns were raised about capacity and velocity and the adequateness of the stormwater drains and the structures to deal with the flow associated from the site. As Mr. Toll talked about, the lot line and the potential impact on the Passios building was talked about, and we really do, as a community, need to determine those lot lines because they will potentially impact the Passios building. One of the things that was suggested by one of the members is looking at utilizing the Memorial Drive as frontage on extending that to Mass Ave and using that as frontage for Passios. But this is a discussion that the school building committee was looking for conceptual approval pending, the resolution of the issues that were identified for the peer reviewer. The planning board did not grant that. They scheduled it for June 23rd, and hopefully some of these issues can be addressed by both engineers in the meantime. But this is an issue that, as Mr. Stoll said, we really need to get in front of. We really need to know where that lot line is, and if there can be adjustments made, now is the time to do it, not after the plan is finalized. There was a point within the peer reviewers report that recommended that the May 23rd, 2014 traffic memorandum, the upgrades that were recommended on that be shown. And the comment from the design engineer is that the off-site improvements are the responsibility of the town. And I don't recall, A, the traffic memorandum, or B, what they are, but I think we need to look at that, because what was indicated is that the on-site improvements are shown, but the off-site improvements are the responsibility of the town. So I think we need to look at that. I don't know, I think all of you have watched that discussion, so if someone wants to add after I'm through, that's fine. The A&R for Montori, they signed 2 lots. It was a 20-acre parcel. Their remaining 10 acres each, they were joined because they were contiguous. Forest Corp in Leominster, on Leominster Shirley Road, they're moving the fence and the earth in 2 weeks to increase sightline distances. Whitetail Crossing, as you guys will recall, this was a plan that they are seeking acceptance by the town to accept Whitetail as a community road, and that was put off because there were some issues that were identified. Apparently, some building permits have now been issued in violation of existing covenants that the planning board has, and so they need now, and occupancy permits have been issued, and that is in violation of an existing covenant that's on record. So they now need a new bond on the road. So what the planning board will be looking for is estimate of the cost to address the deficiencies, and we'll be looking for a new bond. And then the meeting schedule for the planning board is as the 6/16, there's a master planning workshop on the center. 6/18, there's the workshop with the building reuse. The May 16th master planning is going to focus on the economic housing component of the economic development plan. 6/18 is the workshop with the building reuse. 6/23 is a planning board meeting, and then on June 30th is the visioning session on the town center with a joint meeting with the historical commission, and it's going, hopefully will be televised, and it will go back in history of the history of the town center, and then make a plan to move forward.
Excellent. No. School Advisory Committee on Acceptance and Diversity.
We have our last meeting on Thursday before the presentation for the school committee.
Excellent. School Committee, Ms. Luck is not here. School Building Committee meets tomorrow. Sewer Commission.
Is meeting tonight.
And Mass Broadband. Okay, Town Manager reports, Department reports?
I don't have it.
None. No appointments and reappointments and resignations. Well, I should announce that we did get a word from our town council that the attorney, and from the Attorney General, that all of our town meeting votes were finalized and reviewed and acknowledged. Is that correct?
Yes, they've all been reviewed and approved by the Attorney General's office, and there are, in most case instances, there are publications that we have to do that the town clerk is in the process of doing.
Excellent. Well, we should, because I mentioned this at the end of our committee reports, because now that the PAC bylaw has been approved after being passed at town meeting, there were some people who we interviewed prior, last month or the month before, and then we should get anybody else, because we should revitalize and get at least that committee back up and running. That's not a reappointment process so much as an appointment process, so.
And we were talking about scheduling a meeting with them as
Right,
Regan's-
right. We'll work with them and yes, and help them get kick-started. No executive session. We will be continuing this meeting, but going off air for a workshop on the procedure, policies and procedures. Our next meeting is next Tuesday, June 17th, 2014. So before we go off air, do we have any final public comment from the board?
A question for the town manager. Is tonight the last meeting minute taker? Is it tonight?
Yes, it is.
I would like to go on record and say thank you to the person, Sue, who's been taking the minutes of our meeting and has learned how to distill complicated topics in a readable message. She also knows when it's hard to distill it and you have to ask the question. So I would like to send some appreciation to her.
I couldn't agree more. I think you've done a phenomenal job, and I think if we don't acknowledge it, then your resignation doesn't exist. Right?
One more.
You have
week.
one
Oh, you
more
have
week?
one more
Oh,
week?
okay.
It's not the 17th.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're practicing. This is a rehearsal.
Good.
No, I think you have done a fabulous job, and I think that we really, I've pointed out to the town manager, and if I haven't said it to you directly, I might have, that really your model of doing the minutes, I think, should really be used across the town, because you do not record conversations, but you record the essence of discussions, and that is a very difficult skill, and you have it down. I mean, really, the minutes read really well. You don't lose anything about what was discussed, and yet it's not like reading a script and then this person said and this person said. So thank you for doing that. And it's all organized very well. It's easy to find where the subject changed, so it's going to be hard to replace you. Thank you. I like that we have one more week that we don't have to worry about replacing.
That's right.
Any other public comment from the board? Any public comment from the public? Okay, so again, we will take this off air and go over the policies and Board of Selectmen policies and procedures, and we will return next week for our meeting at, are we meeting at 7, right? 7 p.m. next Tuesday. Good night.
Good night.